We think of the U.S. Constitution as the complete rulebook for the government, right? Every power is supposed to be written down. But what if I told you the president has a set of, well, hidden powers, especially when it comes to foreign policy? Powers you won't actually find anywhere in the text? Well, today we're diving into exactly that, the president's unenumerated powers. It really is a fascinating puzzle, isn't it? I mean, the whole point of the United States was to have a limited government with its powers spelled out. So if they're not written down, where on earth do these authorities come from? To find the answer, we have to look beyond the text itself and into what it actually means to be a country. So you've got this tension. On one side, there's the Constitution, which is all about strictly limiting what the government can do. And on the other side, you've got the president on the world stage, acting with this massive authority that seems to come from somewhere else entirely. That's the conflict we're going to sort out. Okay, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll lay out the paradox itself. Then, we'll play detective and trace the origins of this hidden authority. After that, we'll look at 4 real-world examples of these powers in action. And finally, we'll talk about why this whole thing is still so important today. So let's get into it. This isn't just some abstract idea. It actually has a name. We're talking about unenumerated powers, and they're a fundamental and, often pretty controversial part of the American presidency. So what are they exactly? Well, think of them as powers that are just considered essential to doing the job of being president, particularly on the world stage, even though nobody wrote them down. But here's the key. They aren't just made up out of thin air. They come from a very specific and, as we're about to see, kind of a surprising source. All right, so if these powers are hidden, where do we find them? Well, the search takes us to 2 main places. First, some clues hidden within the Constitution's existing text, and second, a much bigger idea about what it means to be a sovereign nation in the first place. You can see a few sources here. The first few probably look familiar, right? Being commander-in-chief, negotiating treaties, receiving ambassadors. Then there's that kind of vague executive power clause. But the most important piece of this whole puzzle, the real game changer, is that last one, inherent sovereign authority. And that's where the story gets really interesting. Okay, so here's the wild part. The core idea is that when the American colonies declared independence, the powers of being a nation, of being a sovereign, didn't just disappear and then reappear. The argument is that those powers were transferred directly from the British Crown to the new United States as one unified country. And listen, this isn't just some dusty historical theory. The Supreme Court basically made it law. In this huge landmark case in 1936, United States versus Curtiss-Wright, the court said that the president, as the nation's main representative, actually wields the foreign affairs powers that once belonged to the King of England. It's like a direct inheritance of power. Pretty incredible, right? So that's the theory, that's the legal history, but what do these powers actually look like when they're put to use in the real world? Let's check out how this abstract legal idea turns into actual presidential action. And this is where it gets really concrete. Our source material does something pretty rare here. It gives us an actual list of these supposedly unlisted powers. This is where the idea stops being abstract and becomes totally real. So let's look at 4 of them. What's amazing is that each of these has a direct line back to the British Crown. Take international criminal jurisdiction. That's the power to deal with things like piracy on the high seas. Well, that's a direct echo of the Crown's old-school authority over the oceans. Same thing with extradition agreements, the power to bring back fugitives without a formal treaty, or managing maritime security in U.S. waters. Even using diplomatic clemency, like using a pardon to solve an international crisis. That traces right back to the king's power to grant mercy for the sake of diplomacy. Okay, so we've seen where these powers come from and what they look like in practice. But why does a legal concept from 1936, based on something that happened way back in 1776, still matter so much in our world today? All right, let's pull all these threads together. The big takeaway is that the president's power in foreign policy is a hybrid. It's part written down in the Constitution and part inherited from this big idea of sovereignty. And remember, this isn't just a theory. The Supreme Court has backed it up. And it has very real consequences for everything from maritime security to international diplomacy. This all leaves us with a really big question for today. The founders, they wanted a government of limited, written powers. But does the messy reality of our modern world demand a leader with more flexible, unwritten authority? Figuring out how to balance that original rulebook with the demands of the global stage, that remains one of the central challenges for the American system. Thanks for joining me on this one.